Hi, friends. I'm so excited for you to hear today's episode about my friend Carli. Remember, it is a two-part episode. So, part one is what you're listening to right now, and part two will go live a week from the day this airs. So, Thursday, November 21st. So, if you're listening to this later than November 21st, you have nothing to worry about and you can listen to them in order. But if you're listening today, just make sure to come back next week to hear the second half of her story. Please forgive any discrepancy in the sound quality of some of the inserted clips for today's episode. We had to work with what we got. But I know you will still enjoy it, and I pray that God speaks to you through this message that we are spilling today. Trigger warning. There are conversations of domestic abuse, childhood trauma, drug and alcohol addiction, and suicide in this episode. Please protect your peace while listening.
Out to my dad and my uncle and said, this is on the verge of happening. And so I really struggled the whole time with my dad knowing that this was going to happen and him not doing anything about it, because I don't know where he was that day when it happened. He was not there. He never drove by, he never came and checked on us. He was not present, and it was all to get back at my mom. He hated my mom because my mom divorced him and left him.
Hi, Stacey.
Hi, Bailey.
Welcome back.
We're back.
We're officially a thing. We are on a second story here. And today's story is a longer one. Going back to childhood, there's going to be lots of negative and sad things and traumatic things in this story. But the story is about Carli, my friend Carli, and also about her relationship with her father, her earthly father. Mm-hmm. And it goes over a fairly long period of time. But Carli says now, even though a lot of it, like a majority of these 29 years we're going to discuss, are negative and there's lots of trauma, she can now look back on these 29 years and see it as hope and renewal of faith, because it's so evident in this story that the Lord never gave up on her or on her family. And now she knows no one is too far gone for God's reach. So he can reach anybody. It kind of falls in line with last week's, but instead of a husband and wife situation, we're talking more of a family dynamic, kind of like the child's perspective of where Scott and Courtney were last week. It'll be interesting to see how these things,
the flip side,
how it plays out differently in Scott and Courtney's kids' lives because of the timing of when they found the Lord versus this for Carli's family. So, moving on to our story today, we're going to go all the way back to Carli's first memories, okay? So she was born in 1992. Actually, at the time of this episode going live, she will have just celebrated her 32nd birthday. We are a week apart.
Happy birthday, Carli.
Happy birthday, Carli. So her episode airs on the week of her birthday, and she's 32 now. But going all the way back to the beginning, here's Carli.
The first memories I actually have, like when I go back in my memory bank and think of, okay, what is the first thing I can remember in my life? It's me and my mom went over to my dad's house. I was probably 3 or 4 at the time. He wasn't living with us because he was addicted to alcohol. He was addicted to drugs. And we went into his house, and at the age of 3 or 4, I knew he had a problem, and I knew alcohol was the source of that problem. And so we were just stopping by his house that day, and my mom and I both went into the house, and I remember I found a box of beer cans, and I took them and put it in the trash can.
And she doesn't really recall then if she really knew that this was the source of the issues her family was having, but she knew there was something not right about this. And then her next memory just comes a year or two later. And again, one of those clear early memories. If you have any of those memories from your childhood where you don't really remember like the before or the after, like that surrounded the moment, but you just can very clearly remember what you saw and how you felt, but nothing else that surrounded it. That was what this particular moment was like for Carli. They had just moved out of a house in Raytown, and her dad had been staying there at that house to do some repairs on it. And he had been there overnight. And so her and her mom woke up the next morning to go check on him.
We walked in, and I don't remember anything before or after this moment. I just have the visual still in my head of my dad face down on the floor, flat out, and he had a beer can on the floor next to his hand, and the beer was everywhere. So he was passed out drunk. He'd been there overnight. And so, yeah, that was my memory of my dad at a young age.
And so these two distinctive memories from her child, those are her earliest memories that she has. So her dad was an alcoholic, but his dad was also an alcoholic. So this is one of those generational curses that are very real. And this is something that trickled down into her family.
My relationship with my dad definitely ebbed and flowed. It was in and out of my life. And so at a young age, I remember him being around, but there was times where he wasn't around at all. But anytime he was around, it was always, you always felt like you were walking on eggshells around him because he would just snap at any moment.
So her family at a very early age was very dysfunctional. They had a very toxic family dynamic.
Him and my mom actually divorced in 1997, so this time I was only 5 years old. They later went on to try and reconcile, and my dad moved back in for a short time, but it was always short-lived. It was very toxic. It was very dysfunctional. So I never saw my mom and my dad interact in a healthy way, in a loving way, in a Christ-honoring way. It was always fighting, abuse, yelling. And so that was kind of the dynamic of the home, always walking on eggshells, and always just, the house was just always filled with rage. And so that continued on with my mom and dad for years. I mean, into middle school, high school.
So around age 7 in 1999, Carli and her family, like her mom and her brother, she has a younger brother and an older sister, and her mom, they move into a nicer area in Lee Summit with the help of her mom's mom. So her maternal grandmother.
My grandma paid for the house, 75% of it, and she was going to move in with us and help my mom raise us.
And they're going to a private school, they're living in this nicer house, and they're going to church, and everything on the outside kind of appeared that they had everything together. So the same year, 1999, when Carli's around 7 years old, that same year, her grandma died. So her mom's mom died. Her dad had heard that they were living in this nice house in this nice subdivision.
Mom doesn't know like who told him about the funeral or how he found out the details. She didn't invite him to the funeral. He found out we were living in Lakewood in a nice house, and that's like how he kind of came back in and wanted to start living with us. So he showed up at grandma's funeral and then like wormed his way back in.
But he wasn't sober, and he was really angry, really abusive, and her siblings and her mom were just constantly walking on eggshells.
I have a memory of me and my brother and my sister having to hide in my mom's closet behind her clothes and my dad was outside throwing stuff at the window.
Then eventually her mom got the strength to kick him back out.
And then I have another memory of my dad sleeping on our deck, and mom would not allow him in the house, and I didn't understand why, but I felt bad for him. So I was like trying to sneak things out to him. And I remember I was trying to sneak out cigarettes to him one time, and the alarm was set and the alarm went off. And so he was very much in and out of the home during that period.
So they're back to living on this single income, barely making it by. They're to the point where they're getting like food donations and they're on the Christmas like angel tree type list and just living very poor.
Yeah, mom couldn't even keep the utilities on at most times. So she would stay home in the dark or the cold or whatever it is and ask our friends' parents to like let us come over and stay the night. I remember staying the night at one of my friends' houses, and her mom was like not excited about it because it was a school night, but she obviously like let me because of the situation. I knew we were poor. And I remember looking at other people's families or even my friends and how they got to go like back to school, clothes shopping and things like that, and just wishing I could be like them and have like a normal family. Because like I said, I have memories of we were always the family on the list at church of who needs Christmas gifts donated to. Mom was always working random jobs, just like trying to make ends meet. But I don't know that I was fully aware of like how bad it was.
So in the midst of all that, they're still going to church, and Carli does get baptized in 2000. And so she felt that call at a young age, but mostly because they were walking in that practice of going to church and stuff.
I remember the actual day of being baptized and being baptized with my brother and who baptized us, and that was really special. I believe that when I got baptized the first time, I was saved, and had I died the next day, I would be in heaven. But I can't put myself back in that time frame and remember why I got baptized. I'm sure it's because we grew up in church. We were at church just as much as we were at home. It was the thing to do, you know. So I'm sure it was just like, you want to accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, yes, so get baptized, that kind of thing, you know?
So she made that choice with kind of that childlike faith, but she really didn't know what that meant. And she really didn't have any backing or foundation to help nurture that.
Right.
So in the midst of that, in 2001, her dad did get sober. So he's not living with them, but he gets sober and he gets involved with AA.
In elementary school, I would say, is when he kind of got his life together, and at least in terms of being able to support himself. He got sober, he got a job, he was working full time. He's a very hard worker, always a hard worker. And he was kind of helping out with the family, but still, my parents were divorced at this point, so we were still living separately. And so I would see him on the weekends. And I know my mom struggled at that point because when we saw him on the weekends, he would always take us to do fun things. And my mom felt like he just got to be the fun parent, and she had to be the one who was literally keeping our family afloat. But at the time, we didn't know that. We didn't appreciate that, you know. And so looking back now, I feel bad for her in that. But yeah, in elementary school, we went to Branson with them. We took trips just with him, and it was good.
But he still just carries this resentment towards her mom for divorcing him. He lets that pour out onto the family as a whole.
He was sober at this point, but obviously still very broken. And they were leading Bible studies together at church. But while he was like having affairs on her and cheating on her and treating her horribly. And so that's the kind of faith that my family had. We go to church, but we come home and it doesn't impact anything else. So my understanding of God and who he was very surface level. It's what I learned at church. You know, there was really no discipling that happened in the home.
So jump ahead a few more years. It's 2005. So Carli is 12 years old. It's the spring, so it's April of her 6th grade year. And they were living in this nicer subdivision in Lee Summit. And Her mom was having a rough time, like, keeping up with everything, and
Right.
again, she was suffering from some mental illness because of all of this abuse from her dad, but she was having a problem paying, like, the final portion of this home mortgage.
So the fact that my grandma paid 75% of the house is important because the house is almost paid off. My dad came in and took out a bunch of loans in my mom's name and credit cards. And what he ended up doing is spending that money on going on trips to Florida and the beaches to like cheat on my mom.
So it's 6th grade, spring. Carly's on her way home from school on the bus, and the bus turns the corner, and it's getting ready to drop them off at her stop.
And as the bus pulls up to our house to drop us off at our stop, our entire house is on our front yard. And there's people that I don't recognize going in and out of our home, bringing belongings out of the house and putting it on the front yard, just on the front yard. And so I remember my mom, as soon as the bus doors opened, I remember my mom standing there with one of our neighbors.
But she's like, I thought you said this wasn't going to happen. And her mom just doesn't even say anything.
Oh.
So her mom's not allowed in the house, obviously, because they're getting evicted. But they did allow the kids to go in and try to get some stuff. And so you just think of how traumatic that is to watch and go through. And then also the effects of it on your mom. There was something illegal about the whole eviction because there were camera crews there videotaping it, like news or something, videotaping this because of what it was. And she never really found out exactly what happened or why it was illegal.
And I remember the guy that was like taking our house back was giving the house to like his daughter or his kids. And so we were definitely in a financially compromising situation, but something about it was not legal. And I remember some friends of my mom's who she hadn't talked to in years just kind of came out of the woodwork. People got word of what was going on. And I still remember them all sitting on the porch of the house directly across from us, making calls and helping us. And yeah, we had nowhere to go.
So to add to the hurt and the pain of all of this, her dad knew this was going to happen.
My mom had reached out to my dad and my uncle and said, this is on the verge of happening. Can you give me some of the kids' inheritance money from their grandpa, which was my dad's dad, to save our home? And they wouldn't do it. And so I really struggled the whole time with my dad knowing that this was going to happen and his kids were going to be homeless and him not doing anything about it, because I don't know where he was that day when it happened. He was not there. He never drove by the house. He never came and checked on us. He was not present, and it was all to get back at my mom. He hated my mom because my mom divorced him and left him.
Like, he hated her so much that she left him and divorced him that he was willing to let his kids suffer in this way. And just to think of how your own dad could do something like that to you as a kid, especially that age. And he was so mad at her mom for divorcing him, but he was the cause of their divorce. He was the one who was emotionally, verbally, physically abusive. He's the one who cheated on her. He's the one who caused all of this hurt.
My mom was not a perfect wife. There's no perfect wife, but he was at fault for the marriage failing, yet he could not deal with my mom leaving him. And so all of this was just to get back at my mom. Meanwhile, me and my siblings are caught in the drift of that, you know.
So this whole situation was super humiliating. She remembers vividly, like, the next day at school.
I remember going to school the next day, and I think my teacher must have heard about it because I just bawled to her in the classroom. And I had 3 girlfriends who I was really close with, and they all made me a card and gave it to me. And the kid on my bus was like, let's, start a lemonade stand for you. But it's humiliating, because everybody now knows you're poor.
They had neighbors that were wonderful people that allowed her and her siblings and her mom to live with them for a while, finishing out the school year and whatnot. So they took them in. But in 6th grade, that's humiliating.
And so embarrassing.
So embarrassing. Yep. They lost a lot of their stuff. Like, they had no money. And so how are they going to get all the contents of their front yard to where they can keep it? Plus, they're living with people who have made room for them. They don't have room for all of their stuff.
We don't have any money, so we certainly cannot get all of this property off of our front porch. My mom's like, what am I going to do with all this? Where am I going to put it? Mm-hmm. And so it sat there for days. And I still remember one day I'm standing on the street on the curb with my sister, her friend, and her friend's mom. They're huddled under this umbrella and just pouring down rain. So we have photo albums that we've lost. We've got stuff from my mom's wedding that was lost. So many like sentimental things from her parents just lost. And we're just staring. It's just pouring down rain. And we're just watching everything become ruined. And so, yeah, I mean, from there we lived with our neighbors for the summer, and then that's when we moved to Pleasant Hill.
So thankfully, one of Carli's mom's friends and her husband, great people, they allowed her and her siblings and her mom to come and live with them, which was in Pleasant Hill in the country. So they ended up moving towns, moving schools at such a crucial age, middle school, and moving to Pleasant Hill. And so she's got now this new cycle starting of really wanting to put on this front of people thinking she's got it together, and this self-conscious facade of I need to look good so I'm not humiliated, so that people don't know what's actually going on in my life. So when they moved to Pleasant Hill, this is when I met Carli. So we met in 7th grade when she moved to my hometown. And she just had the look of everything's fine. Everything's great. And when people would ask her, you know, why'd you move here? Like, it's kind of a random age to move. Our town that we live in now is close to a military base and a college. And so people move here all the time. It's not that big of a deal. But in my hometown that I grew up in, it was kind of outside of Lee Summit. It's this really small suburb, and you don't just move there like in the middle of 6th or 7th grade. So everyone's like, why are you here? What did you move here for? And instead of being like, oh, we got evicted and kicked out of our house.
Let me tell you the story.
She just was like, oh, my mom just really wanted to live in a small town. And even I, as one of her best friends since that time, didn't really know the gravity of why they moved or the hardship of why they moved until we were adults, because she was so ashamed and so humiliated by that experience. So they moved to Pleasant Hill.
So we moved in with her best friend until we could find our own house. But when we finally moved into our own house, we were on governmental housing assistance, so we could only get, this much house and only this much money to a lot and all of those things. And so that was the case up until I moved out of my mom's house. I mean, she was getting government assistance until then.
They got to move into just this little, only what could cover in a small town that doesn't really have a lot of apartments or duplexes. This really, honestly, really nice little house that had been set up for somebody like this. So they would live there, and her mom was really unstable mentally during this time.
So between moving to Pleasant Hill in my sophomore year, I would say were the years where mom's mental health took a decline, but my dad's stability actually increased. So he was sober. He was working a great job. He was very involved with us. And he was a little bit of our rock at that point, ironically enough, when my mom was so unstable. So I have a lot of even right now, as I'm talking through this, flashbacks of different memories that we lived through that are coming to during that time, centered around my mom being mentally unwell, because she was who we were living with full time. My dad, we visited him on the weekends, but we were living with mom full time. One instance that's coming to mind is when we were evicted, we had cats and dogs, we had animals, and the law enforcement asked my mom to sign a waiver to put down our animals as a part of the eviction process. And my mom would not do it. She would not sign that. And so she had a warrant out for her arrest. And my dad just seized on any opportunity he had to spite my mom. So he reported her and reported her out and about. And she was arrested for having that warrant out and taken to jail for about a week, I believe. And we lived with my dad during that time.
So they lived with their dad for a short period. Like, yeah, I mean, you're just like, how could a dad do this to his kids?
Yeah.
You know, you have to hate somebody so much.
Like, not only did he abandon them, but then it's just like
Takes their mom away.
He's still like coming back.
Yeah. It's like he has no sympathy for the children at all. He's so blinded by his hate that nothing else matters. So they lived with their dad for a short period of time, and then they were back and forth for a little bit. And their dad did not live close. He lived up closer to the city. And so the cops would get involved multiple times, and it just wasn't a super great state. So they make it through like middle school. Carli's in high school, and right off the bat in high school, like freshman year, starts dating what would be her on and off boyfriend for the next 5 or 6 years. Very toxic relationship. Obviously started super young. He was a couple years older than her and just started seeking that love through relationships, right? And so they moved across town into a different assisted living situation in these duplexes her sophomore year. And she's in this very toxic relationship. And her mom was working all these odd paying jobs. And they were very, very poor still.
We didn't have anything. And so, yeah, I remember being like ashamed of my clothes, and people would always ask, you know, every year, what did you get for Christmas? Or what did you guys do for Thanksgiving? And I'm like, not only did I not get anything for Christmas, but we don't have family. Like, we don't do anything for the holidays.
And her mom was super depressed. And it's important to note that her mom was not like this. This was not predisposed mental illness.
My mom she wasn't born with mental health issues. Those came through the relationship with my dad.
Like the trauma.
And she was a bright, vibrant, beautiful young woman. And people still tell me this to this day of like, your mom was just a ray of sunshine. And then she met my dad. And my dad, she went through a lot of physical, emotional, mental abuse with my dad. And she went into survival mode because she was trying to keep us kids alive as well as herself. And I don't think she felt like at the time she could get help. She didn't even know what that looked like. She was just trying to survive. And so all of that led to the mental health struggles of depression, of anxiety, of bipolar.
This was caused by the traumatic relationship that she had with Carli's dad. She ended up in survival mode for her kids.
Yeah.
And I think all the time, as a mom who has a husband who is present and financially supportive of my family, you know how that is. I think how lucky I am, but I also think it's still really hard. And I'm just like, I don't know how single moms do it.
Yeah.
Like, it makes me want to cry because it's so hard, even when you're married and when you have support. And I have like family, grandparents, and all the things. But to think of, I feel like I'm barely making it as a mom some days. And
you have that good foundation.
Yeah, I have the Lord. I have a husband. I have supportive family. And it's so hard to raise kids. So I cannot imagine how difficult, one, to be a single parent, but two, to be a single parent who's gone through the amount of abuse and trauma that her mom had gone through, and then still being attacked by your ex-husband in this way and trying to survive and trying to make rent and trying to provide food and with 3 kids. Like, how hard that is. So her dad would, at this point, he would financially help the kids sometimes, but he would not help her mom. And he still hated her. Like, he would give her and her siblings what they wanted. Like, if they were like, I want to buy this shirt, I want to go shopping or whatever, he'd be like, okay, fine, but you have to work it off. Like, you have to come over and rake leaves. Like, it was never just, I'm giving this to you because I love you and I owe thousands to your mom in child support that I've
Mhm.
never paid. But it was always, okay, well, you need to work that. It was
Mhm.
never just
Yeah.
lovingly given to them. They were never just cared for in that way.
Middle school and high school was rough just because I think I was going through my own stuff and he didn't really know how to deal with me, I would say. Like he was harsh because his dad was harsh with him. He didn't know to parent because he had never been parented well, truthfully.
So, high school, Carly struggled with the loss of her identity. She never really got to know who she was. And she had extreme emotional brokenness. And she ended up finding her worth through these toxic
Mhm.
relationships.
I was anxious. I was in and out of an unhealthy relationship that I think marked me more than I realized.
And a lot of that stems back to she didn't really know what a healthy relationship
Right.
looked like, but she did know it was addicting because it was one of those when it's good, it's really, really good. And when it's bad, it's terrible.
I didn't even know what I was doing. I didn't
Mhm.
know healthy, unhealthy. I didn't know looking for love, not looking for love. I knew what that relationship was, and it was toxic, but it was also addicting. And it was when it was good, it was great, and when it was bad, it's like I don't know if I can go on living.
And so she was always striving for those good moments and striving for this boy's attention and his affection and the feeling. And he goes off to college because he's a couple years older.
It was on and off, and it was never too far out of reach. And it was a lot of striving. Was always like wanting to earn his attention, his affection, me feeling like he's off at college with all these other options, and I've just been left behind, and I'm trying to get him back and seek his attention. And I think that's what I was doing with my dad too, was like trying to get his attention, trying to get his love at whatever cost. I didn't know in this relationship how to say enough is enough. Like that's not okay. I'm okay without you because I wasn't. I wasn't okay without him. I did not have the Lord filling me up. I was going to church, but that was it. Like there was no spending time in the Word. There was no praying. There was no any of that. It was He was my oxygen. He was my lifeline. And if I didn't have Him, I didn't know what to do. And I was not okay.
And she was very broken and very depressed. And so by her senior year, she had started seeing the issues with her dad and her mom. Like you get to a certain age and you start understanding.
Yeah.
And you start seeing why your mom is in such a poor state and that it does have to do with your dad. So she was finally so fed up with her dad.
So I actually got to my senior year of high school and had just kind of had enough of him. And I didn't talk to him our entire senior year. I just was like, I can't do it anymore because he was sober at this time and he was supporting us in some capacity financially at this point, but he was still very cool. So yeah, my whole senior year I didn't talk to him. I remember I did send him a invitation to our graduation and he came.
But after graduation, she's still struggling and her mom can tell. So her mom takes her to a psychologist to get her medicated for anxiety and all these things because that's all her mom knew how to cope. And so that's what her mom, not knowing how else to help her, thought this is going to be the fix.
Post high school Carli, college Carli, I just look back and I'm like, what was she doing? She had no guidance, no support. I didn't know it at the time, but I was just surviving, And I think what it really boiled down to is I didn't have any identity. I had no idea who I was. I was an anxious wreck all of the time. I was a social wreck all of the time. I was very insecure and I had no purpose. I was literally just going through life blinded, really, just trying to figure things out for myself, I would say I was coping in the way my family copes. The way I had been taught to cope was through pharmaceutical medicine and alcohol. And so that's how I coped. I had been through a lot of trauma at this point and had done counseling, but outside of that, I didn't know how to cope.
So she's still on this on and off again relationship with this boyfriend.
I'm thinking of moments right now when we were off, how broken and depressed I was. And when we would go into an on moment and I would see him over a weekend or he would text me, it was like my whole everything lit up and I came alive again. And it's like he was my on and off switch. And it wasn't until post high school, middle of college, probably sophomore year of college, that things ended in a really dramatic way. But praise God that they did. Yeah. And I think it's also important to note that you accept the love that you think you deserve. And if you don't have the Father's love, God's love, then you're just looking for that anywhere. And people would tell me, you date your dad, you date what you've been shown to love. And I was shown that love is striving, love is like toxic, love is fighting, and not what true love was. So I did not know. And that was one thing that trickled into, my college years of like, I did not know how to be loved by a good man. And I will say I was very blessed post high school to be pursued by multiple really good men who would have made great boyfriends, great husbands, and right now are making great husbands. But I did not know how to receive their love. I would go on dates drunk because I did not know how to do that. I was so anxious. And I would push guys away that were good because I didn't know how to receive that. It wasn't comfortable. And then I would push him to the side and I'd go get the bad boy because that made me feel good. I knew how to handle that and it was comfortable and it was fun.
And so she's drinking on the weekends, blacking out, driving and drinking, and also she's taking Xanax and Klonopin like it's candy because she's prescribed it, right? It's supposed to make her feel better. And so you combine those two things. You combine pharmaceutical drugs and alcohol, lots of alcohol. And she didn't really understand it at the time because no one had explained to her how to appropriately take this medication or what you can't take it with. But that was how she was coping. And her mom was trying to do her best, but she didn't know how to help Carli. So we get to August of 2012. So this is fall of the year after she graduated high school. So she graduated high school in 2011.
Okay.
We make it a year and a
out.
half almost. We're in August of 2012.
My mom could tell that I was struggling and out of control. And she wanted to help me, but I don't think she knew really what to do or what was the best thing. And so at the time I was working at a daycare and going to school. And the daycare director came into the room I was in with kids and she said, "Hey, there's been a family emergency. You need to go home." And I drive home and my sister is there, my brother's there, my mom is there, and there's a social worker there. And they tell me they are worried about me and they want me to check in to rehab. And I was blindsided. I had no idea that was going to happen. I knew I had an issue, but I didn't think I needed to go to rehab. What I needed at the time was love and support and guidance and discipline and boundaries and structure. I did not have that. That's what I needed. So, yeah, they finally convinced me to go.
So she goes to her room. She slams a ton of Klonopin and packs a bag and goes to Two Rivers in the city, which is basically just a place for you to detox and kind of get yourself together.
They took me up and had me admitted, and you have to go through basically an admittance test. You can think of it like that, of like, do you really need to be admitted kind of thing? Like, or do you really have issues? And I passed, probably because I was high off Klonopin. So yeah, it wasn't even a rehab thing. It was just, it's basically a place that keeps you alive for a few days. You can detox there, you can get stable, and then they discharge you. And I stayed there for I think about 4 or 5 days and did a lot of group classes. And I left there and it didn't do anything, it didn't do anything for me.
So she goes in, does 5 days of rehab, gets out, and it really just didn't do anything. So that's August 2012. The next year, it's 2013. She's 20 years old. It's February. So 6 months after rehab. Rehab's in August of 2012. We jump to February 2013. And Carli is still drinking, still taking medicine, still driving and drinking.
I had been through a lot of trauma at this point and had done counseling, but outside of that, I didn't know how to cope. I also didn't know the Father's love like I do now. So I looked for love in every different place, acceptance in every different place, and really just tried to find a place where I felt like I belonged, because there was never a sense of belonging in my own home. So yeah, when I was 20, I was dating a guy who was very unhealthy, and that night we were spending time together, and I was driving back home, and I got my first DUI. So I was arrested. That was when I was 20, and still, I'm almost 32. That was 12 years ago, and I look back on that girl, and I'm like, she was so lost. Like, and it makes me sad to think about her now, because she was just looking for answers in all the wrong places. So she gets this DUI. She calls her dad to come pick her up because he had DUIs. Calls her dad to come pick her up. He has to spend $1,500 in cash to bond her out. And then he comes and gets her. It's 2 a.m. and he's like, we're going to Walmart. I got to go grocery shopping. She's like, I'm drunk, Dad. I can't go to Walmart. And he makes her go to Walmart. So he picked her up and was pretty cold and stern about it, but he had DUIs before. So he aids her in kind of helping her, like, get a lawyer and do all the things needed for this DUI. And she's not 21 yet, so if you're not 21 when you get a DUI, it doesn't show up on your permanent record. And ironically enough, on my 21st birthday, I finished my last, what's called a SATOP class that you have to go through when you get a DUI. So it's like, on my 21st birthday, it was a Monday, I finished my, last drinking and driving class, and then me and my 2 friends went out to the Peanut in downtown Lee Summit on a Monday night. There was nobody else in the bar except us 2, and we had a time. But you know what the crazy thing is it didn't, you would think that after going through something like that you would like learn, or you would make better choices, and I didn't. I continued to date guys who were not good for me. I continued to drink, overtaking, abusing pharmaceutical medicine. At that time, I was really struggling with anxiety. So next year is 2014, and this kind of starts the decline of her dad's health. Yeah. Her and her dad had started kind of working on some stuff. Like, they ended up going to counseling together after her graduation, all that stuff. Him and I started counseling together. And at the time, I was struggling to forgive him for what he had done to my mom. I didn't struggle at the time with how he had hurt me or what he had done to me. I just couldn't get over some of the stuff he had put my mom through, and I was so angry at him for that. But he had agreed to go to counseling with me, and I would say, like, that is where we were able to process through the real stuff that happened and, like, talk through it, heal through it, and I forgave him. And I can't imagine, 1, where I would be today, or 2, who I'd be today without counseling. And my mom is who I can have to thank for that, because she got us into counseling at a very young age, because she could tell what we were going through was very traumatic.
In 2014, her dad had to stop working because he had had so many issues with his back that he was physically not able to work anymore. And that was really, really hard for him because, like I said, he made those kids work for what they got. He was a very hard worker. He had always done a lot of physical labor to earn a living. And so he had to stop working at this point. And this is 2014. So after her DUI, dad coming to get her, dad has to stop working.
I would say around 22 is when I kind of started to slow down in terms of like the drinking and the partying and the going out. And I was working full time at a bank. I was going to school, going to college.
And then we go to December of 2016. She graduates from college. So she graduates from UCM right here, hometown, our hometown now. And then you jump forward a few months to March.
When I graduated college, I was probably in the most healthy spot I've ever been in. I was going to church every now and then. I wasn't plugged in at a church. I didn't have a strong relationship with the Lord. It was just kind of a go to church thing. And when I went, I was usually going by myself. I never dated a guy at that point in my life that was going to church. So if I went, it was by myself. My mom wasn't going. My brother wasn't going. It was just me. And so it was, again, still very surface level. But I was working full time, just graduated college, and I had accepted a new career job post-college. It was going to be my first career job. I still remember the amount of money that they offered me in terms of salary, and I just, I had never thought I could make that much money. And it really wasn't that much money, but to me, like growing up, we were poor. And so the fact that I was just on a salary, like, was a big deal to me. And so I kind of felt like, oh my gosh, I'm, getting my life together. I'm getting on track. Like, I'm moving forward.
So March of 2017, she's about to start a new job with a program called Grad Staff, who hires graduates like right out of college, gets them a job in there using their degree. And so she's supposed to start this new job on Tuesday. And up until this point, she'd been working at a bank. And so her last day of work at the bank is supposed to be Monday. And on Tuesday, she's supposed to start this new job through Grad Staff for what she just graduated from college for. And it's the Friday before this, the weekend before she's supposed to start all this, quit her job at the bank and start this new job. And she goes out with some friends.
We met at one of my friends' houses and jumped in her car and went down to the Martini Corner area and drank down there, took shots down there, drank way too much. And she drove us back to her house. And instead of just sleeping there, I wanted to go home and sleep in my own bed. And so I drove almost 30 minutes home in the middle of the night, just inebriated. And I remember being probably just a few miles from home at this point and driving with one eye open because I was so drunk that I had to have one eye so I could see straight and I could not see doubles. And I really do believe that both of these times where I was arrested for drinking and driving, it really was the kindness of the Lord to protect my life. I was driving on roads and in situations that I could have really hurt myself or hurt other people. And so in this situation, it was actually the car behind me that called the police station and said, hey, I think this car in front of me is drunk. And, I used to be so mad at that driver. I have no idea who that person is, but I used to think I was so close to home. I was going to make it just fine. They got me in trouble, and I now look back and I'm like, thank God that they called, But yeah, they called the cops and said, hey, I think this person's, drunk. And so the cop looks up my license plate, sees where I live, and can figure out I'm getting ready to turn left off of the highway onto this side road to go home. So they're waiting for me at the corner. And I remember them pulling me over. They told me to pull me over because the light above my license plate was out. But I'm like, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I remember he pulled me over. I remember where I was. He put me in the car, handcuffed me, put me in the back of the car. They breathalyzed me. I did the field sobriety test. I was for sure drunk. Yeah. So, took me back to the station. They do the mug shot. They do the fingerprints. And he's like, call somebody to come get you. And I was like, I'm not calling anybody. I did it once with my dad. And I can't remember. I don't know why I didn't want to call my dad at that moment, but I didn't. I've called out for this before. I'm not calling again. I said, you can just keep me here. I'm not calling anybody.
They ask her if she wants to call someone to come pick her up, and she's like, no, I'm not doing. Like, she's just in this state of a really, really low moment because things weren't good in her life, but from the outside, she was doing better.
Okay.
And here she is. She's graduated. She's ready to start this job. If you looked at, and she's going to church, but she's still drinking a lot. She's still living in that kind of depravity.
I don't know where this comes from, but one of my sin struggles, or which one of my struggles, is I really struggle with shame and guilt to the point where I was very suicidal that weekend. I felt embarrassed. I felt shame. I obviously felt guilty. I felt all of these emotional feelings, but then I also felt the burden of what I had just done and what was to come with that.
Here she is getting this second DUI, and she knows, because she's had a DUI before, she knows what this means, because that DUI from before isn't on her record right now. But if you get another DUI after you turn 21, the previous one gets back on your record. So now she goes from 0 DUIs on her record, starting a new job, graduating college, all the things, to 2 DUIs on her record. And one more after this, you have to register as a felon.
Okay.
And so, and just the cost.
At that time, 10, 12 years ago, they were about $10,000 each. I don't know if they've gone up, but they're extremely expensive to deal with. And the process is long. It's exhausting. It's embarrassing. And I just didn't know how I was going to get a job, because every job would run my background check and see that I had 2 DUIs.
And so she knows that come Tuesday, even if she starts this new job, even if she does well, because it's through grad staff, right? If she does well, it's like a 90-day type thing, right? Because grad staff is in charge of paying her, like through this program they have with these companies. Grad staff is the one getting paid to pay her. If she does well and they want to keep her after the 90 days, then she gets onboarded officially with this company that she's working for. And at that point, she's going to have 2 DUIs on her record, and they're not going to hire her.
Yeah.
And she knows that. So she's just in this low moment, feeling honestly like life just
her world
isn't worth it. Like,
crumbling
just
around her.
super low. She's like, she's so ashamed. And so she's like, no, I'm not calling anybody. I'll just stay here. And the police officer was nice enough. He took her home, dropped her off.
I just finished 6 years of college. I've been busting my butt to work full time, go to school. I'm kind of getting on the right track in terms of who I'm hanging out with, how I'm spending my time, all of that. And I have just proven that I am just a product of my upbringing, and that I'm just another statistic, and I'm just another line in our genealogy of screw-ups and alcoholics and, all of that.
And so the next day she goes to see her dad.
I remember when this happened, I drove up to his house that weekend and told him in person. I texted him and I said, I want to come. I need to tell you something. So I drove up there. I told him face to face. I cried, and I remember he put his arm around me on the couch like this. And I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but he was not affectionate. He was not soft-hearted, nothing. And so that was a really big deal.
So for the first time in her life, really, she's getting this ounce of compassion from her dad, who you'll see later in the story, looking back on this moment, to me, I think her dad needed to see almost that generational curse. Like, when you've gone through a DUI or multiple DUIs, and he was sober at this point. Remember, he got sober back in pretty early, like 2001. he got sober. He's been sober. He's still living a very low and hateful, resentful life, but he's sober. And so he knows what that generational curse of alcoholism can do. And Carli's obviously in this state of despair, and he has to see himself.
Oh yeah.
You
Well,
know,
and as a parent, you would think
yeah.
this is partly my fault.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I did all these things. Like
Mhm.
I want better for my kids, but
Mhm.
what did I do? Like he did nothing, obviously.
Right.
He did
For
more
so long, he
hurt
was not
than
there.
anything. And they've gone through this counseling, they're mending this relationship. And I think he's finally able to kind of see some of that damage that he's
Mhm.
caused to his
Mhm.
kids, you know, through his own bitterness and hatefulness. So she runs through these options she's got with this job situation, because she could start the job Tuesday, but what's the point? They're not going to hire her. So Monday she goes back to the bank.
I think I went into my HR lady's office and I was crying, and I was just like, some things have happened, made me change my mind, I'm going to stay.
So she stays at the bank. She's on the phone with her dad at work after telling the bank she's staying, and she misses a call, and she goes to the voicemail, and it's police department.
So I call him back, and he said, hey, it was the chief at the police station, and he said, just wanted to let you know that we found a defect in the breathalyzer, and you're free to come get your driver's license. We're throwing your DOI away.
Come pick up your driver's license.
What?
Come pick up your ID. Defect in the breathalyzer. Can't charge you with anything. You're good to go. And this is the moment for Carli that she finally, after growing up in a home that we go to church on Sundays, but our life never is any different, she finally understands the gospel in that moment. Like it's that moment that, like she knew the Lord, there was that sliver there, but this is the moment that the Lord just floods in and is like, this is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
This is grace.
It's
This
mercy.
is mercy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to cry.
Mm-hmm.
So she had heard songs, you know, in her journey, in her church journey.
I had heard songs about, you know, how heavy our sin is and the chains of bondage that we are in. And I never got it until that situation, because I felt so heavy from what I had done. I felt the chains of bondage that I would be in for the rest of my life because of my record, because of the financial toll this was going to take on me. Because of all of it, I felt the weight, and I knew I was guilty of it. I deserved it. I did what I did to bring that all on me. There was no escaping that. But in one moment, the Lord said, I'll take it. It's mine. Your record's clean.
And in that moment, she knew she deserved that DUI.
Mm-hmm.
She deserved her life to be ripped out from underneath her.
Yeah.
She deserved that $10,000 that she was having to face. She deserved losing the opportunity of that job. And it wasn't the first time. She'd done it and didn't learn her lesson. Like, she knew and she felt that bondage of her own choices and her own sin.
I remember thinking, why? You know, like, I know this is God, but why? I don't deserve it. And that's what, you know, salvation is. It's what he does for us. And so we don't deserve it. It doesn't make sense. It's grace upon grace.
And in that moment, God said, I will take it away. I will take it all away.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I think that does coincide with her dad showing her that little bit of grace in that moment. It coincides with her dad in that moment of compassion. That sliver of compassion he showed her, because I think he needed that almost as much as she did. And then the Lord that was what opened it up for him to just flood her with his mercy. So she calls her dad back, and she's like, Dad,
guess what?
And tells him, and he's like, Carli, this doesn't happen.
Yeah.
This does not happen. Even if all these things were to happen, even if the breathalyzer defect, all these things, the likelihood, like, that doesn't happen. And she's just, throughout this story, Carli never she very much lives that gospel. She lives out her faith in that transformation. There's not a whole lot of times where she straight up tells her dad, you need Jesus. I have Jesus. But in that moment, she said, it had to be God.
Yeah.
Had to be God.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was 2017, right? So 2017 is when this life-altering change happens for Carli. But that also marked the second part of our story, which is 2017 being the beginning of a 2-year journey with her mom and also her siblings within that Carli classifies as the hardest years of her life. And because it's so heavy, like I know what she's about to go through.
Yeah.
But even just in this moment, realizing God flooded her with his love and his strength and his grace right at the start of this.
Right.
So that's really powerful. And
Yeah.
I'm realizing this, but for her to have that moment and that realization at the beginning of what would be
I am with you.
the heart. Yeah. And that he was able to carry her through it screams so much of his strength and what we get when we receive that. So I will save the second half of this story for part 2. But I mean, what do we get from this?
Yeah.
Like,
what are our takeaways?
There's a lot of takeaways in this second half. But in this first half, I think the takeaway for Carli is being able to, like for all of us, and we will probably, this will be a resounding theme to the supernatural love and grace of the Lord and how he does protect us, like how he is there, because she went through all this hurt and stuff and she didn't have the Lord, but there was a lot of protection and provision over her life through those years. But yes, the second half of the story will go deeper into her family dynamic and the relationship that she has with the Lord impacting that family dynamic in a positive way. So it'll be a lot more positive.
Yeah.
But the beauty of this moment for her leading up to this is just, it's really beautiful. And I see new things and new pieces of what God does in stories. Like the more I look at them and evaluate them, just the evidence that the Lord is in them is overwhelming. It's really powerful. So, do you have any questions?
I don't. I think as I'm just thinking through the story and like hearing Carli's story and knowing that she's not alone in that story. Like there are kids who've grown up in a single parent family or with an alcoholic dad without that example of like our Heavenly Father, like what he is and how caring and loving and gracious he is. Then I think if you're in that situation, you're probably like, you don't know how, like you haven't had that example set for you. You don't know what that looks like. But like as Christians, we can take comfort in that we do have the Holy Spirit inside of us. And so even when we feel alone, when we have felt alone our whole life because a parent wasn't there or, the like tragedies have happened, traumatic experiences, like that kind of stuff will just wreck you. But yeah, I think when we realize like we as Christians have Christ, have the Holy Spirit that lives inside of us, he won't ever leave us. He won't ever forsake us. He helps and guides us in living that holy life. Let me read this verse in First Thessalonians
First Thessalonians. Pulling out the Thessalonian.
Okay, so 1 Thessalonians 5:23. I think it goes on into 24. But now may the God of peace himself sanctify you completely, and may your whole spirit, soul, and body be kept sound and blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. He who calls you faithful, he will do it. And so I just have a note, but he won't leave us alone to figure this out. Like, so thinking about Carli, she didn't have an example. She didn't, know how to live this life, but just to take comfort in that he's given us the Holy Spirit that lives inside of us. And so also I wrote John 14:16, I will ask the Father and he will give you another counselor to be with you forever. Yeah, I think just knowing that like that is hard. That's a hard life to grow up in. But to take comfort in the Holy Spirit is with you. He won't ever leave you. Sanctification, right? It's a whole process.
Yeah.
Like, and we won't ever see it completed, like this side of heaven. But just knowing like it's God's will for our lives, being made more into him, her story, like, well, I mean, it already has had an impact on people, but will continue to like change people's lives.
Yeah.
The goodness of God.
And sanctification, I feel like, is what that's what the second half will really dive into what that is. But thinking about even those early stages of those seeds, that we get planted, and those verses about him never leaving, like she didn't fully grasp or let God in. But at that early age, I just think like how important, even if we can't see it right away, what that impact of dragging your kids to church has.
Yeah, it was just a routine at the moment.
It wasn't, I mean, when we know what that is, like what a real relation, her parents obviously didn't really fully understand. They hadn't really let the Lord in. And as Christians who have understood that, we want our kids to know that earlier. But when you don't know that, and then your kids don't know that, there is still value in dragging them to church and trying to seek that, you know, because for Carli, she was baptized. She had that head knowledge, She, even in adulthood, was still trying to walk out that head knowledge, which ultimately, even without, she didn't understand God's hand in her life until later, but he was there. She had accepted it to a degree. I mean, she was baptized. She had opened her heart to it to a degree, but didn't really understand that God was always there until later, that he was always watching over her, that he was always protecting her, and he still loved her, and he still wanted what was best for her. And some of these stories, like Scott's last week, are smack in the face moments. And Carli's is kind of like that. It's a smack in the face moment after years of just literally stepping foot inside a church and not really understanding the impacts.
I'd grown up in a Christian home, but I never experienced the gospel. And there's a really big difference between Christianity and experiencing the gospel and having an encounter with the Lord. And I just remember in that moment, it all made sense to me. I deserved it. I did what I did to bring that all on me. There was no escaping that. But in one moment, the Lord said, I'll take it. It's mine. Your record's clean. That's what my record looks like. I had 2 DUIs before, and the Lord took it, and now I have none. And so that's when everything made sense, and I understood it, and I encountered the gospel. I encountered the Lord.
And those moments are stuff we carry. And I think like even in this moment, like just talking about it, once you do have the Holy Spirit in you, even just talking about those moments for other people, we can feel like I can just feel God's love and God's presence. And that's what makes us overwhelmed with his mercy and with the beauty of his love. So yeah, this is the start of her process of that sanctification, which we will dive into more. But it just goes to show that he doesn't leave you. Those verses are so true. His word tells us, it's encouraging to know. And we were just talking about this at Bible study last week, of how once you've received it, once God opens your spiritual lens, like to see his mercy and his beauty, you can look back on these things, just like Carli said in describing this story. It's so sad. It's so negative. There's so much trauma. But once you have the Holy Spirit and you can look back on your life and you can look back on all these events, and instead of feeling despair and sadness and guilt and shame, you can look back on it with hope, and you can look back on it with this new light of God was there the whole time. Like, wow, God he did so much that I didn't even know about.
Yeah.
And even in this moment talking to you about it, I see new things that he did through my friend, through her life in those moments that you don't realize till you take a closer look later with that spiritual lens on. And it's really powerful. It's really cool to see. And I think that's why I want to share these stories, is because I want people to know that, like, like Carli said, no matter how far you are from the Lord, no matter how far gone you feel, or how despaired, or how traumatic, or how sad and terrible your life has been, or the things that you did because of that trauma, the choices you made, the sin that you had because of these things that have happened to you, no one is too far gone for the Lord. No one is beyond his reach. Like, he is there waiting, and all we have to do is open our hearts to accept that love. And that's what I want people to be aware of, is you need to let him flood you with his love. You need to let him show you the power of it so he can then change everything. And that's what he does in the second half of this story for Carli.
Yeah.
I'm excited to tell you about it. But that'll be for a different day. Okay. I think I'm about to say it. Are you ready?
Here we go.
That's the spill.
Thanks for the tea.
We hope your cup was filled by this truth. If you don't want to miss out on anything spilling from us, make sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever you are listening. Download the episode and leave us a review. It really helps us out. You can follow us on all the socials. Our link tree is in the show notes. We want to thank our spillers from today's episode for sharing their tea with us. Remember that we only share spiritual tea here at the Spiritual Tea Company, and we define that as truth that enlightens others and affirms the Holy Spirit in us. We hope this encouraged you today to spill out your truth onto others of how God is working in your life. To learn more about being a spiller or living a more spill-worthy life, go to our website, spiritualtea.co. That's spiritualtea.co. And don't forget to spill out this episode by sharing it with someone you feel God wants to touch with this story. Stay filled, friends.